Hello, everyone. As Sophie said, my name is Alyssa, and I'm really excited to be here with you all. Tonight, I will be discussing the formal 18th century dinner through the lens of Horace Walpole, his Worcester porcelain collection, and Christmas. So how do all of these things fit together? Horace Walpole, born in 1717 and died in 1797, was an affluent writer, antiquarian, collector, and London politician who came from family of money and title. His Gothic villa, Strawberry Hill, was centrally located just outside of London and served as an intermediary space for repose and for entertainment. He is best known for his social aptitude with a wide variety of individuals due to his extensive record of correspondence, transcribed and open access thanks to Yale and the Lewis Walpole Library. With Strawberry Hill's accessible location, he was more than willing to show it off to the general public or host his own private soirees. Walpole's personal collection was well documented for distribution by his own self-published catalog of the contents of Strawberry Hill. This inventory, if you will, contained an extensive collection of fine and decorative arts, including glass, silver, and of course, porcelain, most with detailed descriptions, manufacturers, and even what was gifted from whom. This included documented examples of Worcester and English porcelain in general. Walpole, like many of his fellow gentry, owned a mixture of both imported and domestic porcelain due to the mass production and increase in use of porcelain during the 18th century. John Wall and William Davis founded the Worcester Porcelain Manufactory in 1751. As one of the first English porcelain factories, Worcester porcelain was more accessible to a larger variety of social strata, but still considered fine enough for elite daily use. This accessibility combined with the ability of Worcester to quickly adapt to new trends made it a popular choice for tableware, including as a realistic choice for a larger Christmas dinner party. In general, I have found that the presence of Christmas in 18th century research is quite scarce, nowhere near the level of Dickens' Victorian Christmas. What I have learned from Horace Walpole, put in the words of the National Trust, is that feasting was at the heart of Christmas celebrations during the Georgian era. This talk seeks to add more specific knowledge on the 18th century Christmas dinner from the lens of Horace Walpole and his Worcester porcelain collection. First, I will introduce the general format of an 18th century formal dinner using Strawberry Hill as the layout. Then I will bring in Christmas, including cuisine, decorations, and the debate on whether the genteel chose their country or townhouses for the location of their holiday celebrations. Throughout, I will be using exclusive examples of Worcester porcelain with some more specific items from Horace Walpole's own inventory. There was a respectable and expected progression to the entire evening that began with a formal entrance into the dining room. Upon hearing the footman's call that dinner was on the table, the gathered dinner party would follow a formal processional organized by rank, age, and marital status. In 1778, writer Fanny Burney recorded one such formal undertaking that she had attended at the renowned literary villa of Streatham Park. She stated, "When dinner was upon table, I followed the procession in a tragedy step, as Mr. Thrale will have it, into the dining parlor." Here, Burney equates the common practice of entering the dining room to that of a funeral procession. Her quip points to the hierarchy that was imposed upon the formal dinner, which laid the foundation for the structure of the meal. The placement of the guests according to rank in the processional also served to streamline the seating process. How the guests were set very much depended on what part of the century it was. For example, the late 18th century in particular saw a shift from men and women relegated to their own separate sides of the table to one of men and women mixed throughout. Even though the ranking order may have been relatively fixed for all British formal dining, the host had a certain agency for how these ritual hierarchies were performed. This is also seen in Burney's remark, as Mr. Thrale will have it, when referring to his tragedy set version of the processional. Because of this, the procession could go beyond the functionality of seating one's guests to also serve as a promenade to showcase and celebrate one's taste throughout the house. The layout guests would have traversed at Strawberry Hill begins at the ground floor, where the state dining room or the great parlor was located. The guests would enter the house through the entranceway, which is above the dining room here on the floor plan, and then arrive upon the showcase piece of the grand staircase here. Traditionally, the dinner party would perform the processional as they made their way up to the main staircase to the eating room. But this practice ceased once the rooms for entertaining moved to the first floor. The main staircase became a showpiece instead, in which the tradition could be embedded visually as a party moved past it. While Strawberry Hill was not a country house, but a London villa, this custom was still prevalent to the formal dinner. Once past the grand staircase, the party at Strawberry Hill would then make their way across the hall to the waiting room, where they would likely gather until dinner was served. From the waiting room, the guests would be able to see into the china closet to the left and the dining room to the right to pique their interest on what was to come. Despite the increasing informality of the British country house itself, dinner was the one domestic element that remained constantly formal throughout the century. From 1750 to 1820, the formal country house dinner served as a site of performance and artifice that embodied elite sociability. The à la Française method of dining was one of the defining characteristics of that formality. With à la Française, the dinner would typically be 2 main courses followed by a dessert. Afterwards, the party would separate by gender, the ladies having tea in the parlor and the men staying back in the dining room for their after-dinner beverages. This exclusive mode of formal service was characterized by having each course completely laid out in symmetrical harmony, meaning the guests would have entered to a fully set table, as seen in these table designs by French chef Vincent Lachapelle and English cook Elizabeth Raffald. The table would be laid out at each course by the footman, barring the removed dishes. A removed dish often consisted of a dish that could be replaced at some point throughout the course by a hot conversational piece to keep things interesting. The dinner would then be served by the footman, with the butler overseeing the beverages and sideboard. Prudent guests knew to bribe the footman beforehand to get the choice cuts. The servants would remain until the dessert course, when the dinner party were left to serve themselves and engage in more private conversation. While à la Française was essentially a communal style of dining, it was also laden with hidden rules and etiquette procedures that only one of a high enough social standing would know how to properly perform. The material culture of the dining table echoed this through the knowledge of their appropriate function and use, as well as with the gentility required to use such fragile materials with the utmost decorum. Even someone well-read via the plethora of contemporary etiquette manuals would not be capable of replicating the conditioned in elite's mannerisms flawlessly without extensive experience. While it was difficult to obtain enough new wealth to move up the ranks, it was manageable. The imposition of impossible etiquette rules was one of the methods in which the elite could control their social sphere and keep their inferiors inferior. Ideologies of luxury, artifice, and theatricality were echoed through the material culture present in the room. The dinner table would have been a feast for the eyes, the varieties of size, colors, textures, and shapes of the cumulative dishes and food. There were a range of trends in dining wares throughout the long 18th century. One common theme was a fascination with the natural world and the artifice of imitating that naturalism, exemplified here in Worcester's Duke of Gloucester service. This service is likely one of the earliest royal services made at Worcester, circa 1770, for William Henry, Duke of Gloucester, brother of George III. Hand-painted by the spotted fruit painter, this tureen and plate are ornamented with a soft green scalloped rim, with the tureen having shell-form handles, both with decadent parcel gilt accents highlighting the spectacular and realistic painted fruits and insects throughout. The tureen further topped with the botanically accurate molded artichoke finial. Many of the pictured fruits would normally be scarce in England throughout the year, and especially in the Christmas time, except for those wealthy enough to have expert gardeners and expensive hothouses where tropical summer fruits could be grown all year round. This is where the ability of porcelain to imitate trends and transport diners to anywhere, at any time, really showcase its power as a material. However, a full dinner service such as this would be scarce for anyone under the rank of Duke. For the formal dinner, dishes were more likely assembled to form a unified display, with full services being reserved for the dessert course. Nothing would be more fitting for a proper British feast than for the fashionable trompe-l'oeil wares, such as this Worcester partridge tree and show-stopping shell centerpiece. These pieces, modeled from soft-faced porcelain and painted with enamels, were on par with the 18th century theme of naturalism within artifice, and would surely have been a conversation starter at the dinner table. The combination of modeling, coloration, and applied texture suggests that dinner guests could easily be fooled into assuming these were the real thing, especially during a candlelight dinner. The artifice expressed with the realism is also reiterated by the use of these terrines for primarily dessert courses, where the sweet contents would not always match the savory exteriors. Trompe l'oeil's role in the dessert is known in part thanks to Horace Walpole. In the inventory for his china room, he lists 4 Staffordshire leaf dishes and a set of Chelsea leaf dishes and plates painted with fruits and flowers as specifically for dessert. The dessert course, being the last, was the most elaborate of the table displays. The tablecloth was removed, exposing the wood table, and the footman and butler were sent away for diners to be left to serve themselves and indulge in more private conversation. While visiting France in 1765, Walpole wrote to George Montagu of a dinner he attended where the conversation was not regulated around the servants. He states, "I dined today with a dozen savants, and though all the servants were waiting, the conversation was much more unrestrained, even on the Old Testament, than I would suffer at my own table in England if a single footman was present." Walpole is appalled at the uninhibited conversation that he found at the French table. The same sentiment was echoed by Fanny Burney after she had attended a dinner in Hampstead in 1792. She recorded in her diary that the dinner and the dessert, when the servants were removed, were delightful. The 2 entries together speak volumes of how the 18th century elite felt about their servants. According to food historian Sarah Paston Williams, the dessert course would consist of numerous provisions. These included elegant china baskets of candied and fresh fruits, wet and dry sweetmeats, comfy and fine porcelain or crystal vases, small porcelain plates for nuts and olives, syllabubs, flummeries, jellies, creams, and molded ices, some of which is seen here in the painting The Sense of Taste by Philip Mercier. Still within the theme of naturalism with an artifice, this Worcester porcelain chestnut basket and dessert dish would have been at home on the 18th century table. The basket, with its delicate porcelain flowers and pierced lid, allow the sweet smells of its contents to escape and entrance the guests. The dessert dish echoes the basket in its flattened form with its hand-painted flowers and molded leaves, both bringing the outside in and transporting diners to a warm spring day, no matter the time of year. One 18th century phenomena, the china closet or china rooms, were a way in which the dining material culture and experience could go beyond the physical space of the dining room. Scottish novelist and second-generation bluestocking Mary Hamilton recorded a dinner that she had attended in July of 1783 at Strawberry Hill, where politician Horace Walpole had shown his guests his china closet. "We dined at 4, the table well served, the conversation perfectly pleasant. Numbers of entertaining anecdotes. After dinner, Mr. Walpole showed us a fine china closet on the ground floor, the library, and other rooms." Overall, it is a seemingly basic diary entry. She records the time they ate, the pleasantness of the meal, and the tour she took of the estate. It is a simple preservation of her day for either her own memories or for those who would happen upon her diary in the future. What makes it truly interesting is that approximately 1 year later, in June of 1784, she recorded another dinner that she had attended, also at Strawberry Hill. "At 4 o'clock, we went down to dinner, which was a very elegant one, and comparably well served. It showed the master of the house was a man of fortune and taste, accustomed to elegancies. We did not sit long after dinner. The 2 gentlemen rose when we did, and Mr. Walpole carried us to a china closet filled with modern and old china." The entry of 1784 is more descriptive in nature, but the recorded activities of the evening are the same. They both began at 4 o'clock, dinner was well served, and the company retreated to viewings of Walpole's china closet immediately after the meal. This repetition suggests that Walpole had an established dining rhetoric on which he could draw from to ensure a successful evening. This shows that the material culture of dining was a consistent and important theme in the experience Walpole had designed as a host. For Walpole, the viewing of his china closet is part of his dinner routine, heavily related to who he was as a collector. Not only was it the host's responsibility to design an impressive meal, but they were also responsible for the collection and display of the material culture throughout. Walpole's china closet was a showcase of the power that resided in the position of the host. Compared to the rest of Walpole's collections, the location of his china closet and his routine of taking his guests to see it after dinner set up a direct correlation between his china closet, its contents, and the act of dining. Furthermore, Walpole displayed gifts from his friends and acquaintances throughout his china closet. These material objects symbolize the relationship he had with the giver and would serve as a visual display of his network, therefore showing his guests his social and political connections. From the collection of porcelain displayed within Walpole's china closet, we find two specific examples of Worcester porcelain. The first, he lists 2 bowls of Worcester porcelain, the pattern from old china. While quite vague, there is a further description of Walpole's collection from the sale of Strawberry Hill in 1842, with a catalog describing these bowls as a pair of very beautiful old Worcester china bowls, beautifully painted and gilt. While the brief descriptions do still leave some room for interpretation, some possible matches for the bowls given the timeline are these 2 examples of bowls enameled in the chinoiserie taste. At the top, the bowl produced circa 1770 is of a predominantly blue ground, with white roundels encasing polychrome painted birds, the whole ornamented in gilt flourishes and foliates. On the right, similar in nature, with the polychrome birds and gilt touches, there are more areas of exposed white porcelain. The second listing in the china closet from Walpole's inventory is of a blue, gold, and colored sugar dish and plate of Worcester porcelain. The sale catalog describes it as a cup, cover, and stand of old Worcester china, blue and gold, painted with flowers. While offering a bit more to go on, the ornamentation, shape, and color placement is still left up to the imagination. Here are 2 examples of very different covered sucreé on stands. The one at the top in a predominantly cobalt brown with medallions of hand-painted colored flowers and slight gilt accents, while the one underneath is a much lighter shade of blue with more exposed white porcelain, ribbed and mainly painted in red flowers. One thing is for sure, among the vast collection of ceramics ranging in time and from all over the world, Worcester was still considered fine enough for display in this special room. Before I move on to Christmas, I just wanted to show y'all what Walpole's china closet looks like today, or at least 2 years ago. It is now an enclave within the gift shop, but as you can see, the mantel surround is still visible. Throughout Horace Walpole's correspondence, he paints a fragmented picture of what Christmas in the long 18th century looked like for him, which mostly centered around food. On the 26th of December, 1748, he writes to Sir Horace Mann, 1st Baronet, of an unusual Christmas at Strawberry Hill. Did you ever know a more absolute country gentleman? Here I am, come down to what you call keep my Christmas. Indeed, it is not in all the forms. I have stuck no laurel and holly in my windows. I ate no turkey and chine. I have no tenants to invite. I have not brought a single soul with me. From this entry alone, we gather the importance of laurel and holly as the common Christmas decorations, turkey and chine as typical foods you would find on the dining table, and most importantly, that Christmas was for socializing. Between the years of 1735 and 1797, a list of expected Christmas foods was mentioned in the letters to and from Horace Walpole. This included mince pies, a regular occurrence, turkey and chine, a collar of brawn, boar's head, and venison. For Walpole, the main meat courses were clearly the most important to record. The collar of brawn was new to me, and it turns out that it's related to boar's head, making it something mentioned twice in Walpole's correspondence, and therefore a possible Christmas favorite. According to Hannah Glass in her recipe book, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, true brawn does come from boar. Glass educates her 18th century readers that brawn is known to be old or young by the extraordinary or moderate thickness of the rind. The thick is old, the moderate is young. If the rind and fat be very tender, it is not boar brawn, but barrow or sow. In her recipe to collar, she instructs to bone the pig or veal, then season it all over the inside with cloves, mace, and salt, beat fine. a handful of sweet herbs stripped off the stalks, and a little pennyroyal and parsley, bread very fine with a little sage. Then roll it up as you do brawn. Bind it with narrow tape very close, then tie a cloth round it, and boil it very tender in vinegar and water, a light quantity, with a little cloves, mace, pepper, and salt, all whole. Make it boil, then put in the collars. When boiled tender, take them up, and when both are cold, take off the cloth. Lay the collar in an earthen pan and pour the liquor over it. Cover it close and keep it for use. If the pickle begins to spoil, strain it through a coarse cloth, boil it, and skim it. When cold, pour it over. Observe before you strain the pickle to wash the collar, wipe it dry, and wipe the pan clean. Strain it again after it is boiled and cover it very close. Glass also includes a recipe for sham brawn, indicating that true brawn was quite expensive, also why it may have been reserved for Christmas feasting. It was not until the Victorian Christmas that specialized holiday tableware came about. For the long 18th century, it was more likely that the dinner would be served on something with a more utilitarian construction. With something like this Worcester creamware plate, the pattern and pierced scalloped rim provided visual interest, while still being durable enough to withstand the cutting and scraping of the flatware. Furthermore, the creamware plates would allow the food to shine as the true table decoration for the dinner courses. For the dessert course, 12 cakes were the sweet highlight of the Christmas table. In a letter to Lady Ossory on the 15th of January, 1797, Walpole writes, "Pray send me no more such laurels, which I desire no more than their leaves, when decked with a scrap of tinsel, and stuck on 12 cakes that lie on the shop boards of pastry cooks at Christmas." This letter, towards the end of Horace Walpole's life, demonstrates the Christmas stereotypes of laurel and tinsel amongst the 12 cakes that we can imagine lying in wait in the bakery windows. Traditionally served on Epiphany, the 6th of January, the 12th-day cakes were sweetened with dried fruit and decorated with molded sugar paste, seen here in Ivan Day's creation, as piping was not in fashion yet. These molded sugar figures echo the current trend of sugar paste parterres and table centerpieces that would soon be replaced by biscuit porcelain figures. The true debate about 18th century Christmas is where the members of the genteel society chose to celebrate this holiday. In his foundational book, Life in the English Country House, Mark Gerard states that in the mid-18th century, complaints were being made that they were tending to stay in London over Christmas and enjoy the pleasure of polite entertainment instead of taking part in the traditional festivities alongside their dependents. As such, Christmas had been a time spent at the country house, where revelry included your entire estate, staff, and tenants, to showcase your power and generosity through festivities and giving. Or, as Horace Walpole so elegantly put the concept in 1748 to Horace Mann, and to Miss Wyndham 100 a year, which she gave her annually at Christmas, and is just such a legacy as you'd give to a housekeeper to prevent her from going to service again. The real question is, where did Horace Walpole, a member of the genteel society, choose to spend his Christmas? After his letter to Horace Mann in 1749, stating that he was enjoying a quiet country Christmas at Strawberry Hill, gardening in the unusually warm weather, Mann responded, with remembering with how much reluctancy you always went to Houghton and that you was ever the last in town, I should never have thought you would turn so complete a country gentleman as to leave all the amusements of the town at their greatest height, go to plant and lay out your acres at Christmas. In this response, Mann recognizes Walpole for the social gentleman that he was, by pointing out how much he disliked going to the family's country estate at Houghton and instead preferred being in London for all the amusements of the town at their greatest height. This is telling in that London was clearly still buzzing despite it being the holiday season, indicating that a decent quantity of genteel society were staying in town. Walpole's choice of town versus country is not quite so cut and dry, however. His opinions on where to spend Christmas change as his letters progress in years. In 1774, Walpole writes again to Horace Mann, stating that, "I propose to be little absence hence till after Christmas, a longer stay than I ever made in the country. But what can I see in London that I have not seen 50 times over?" By 1777, he had become even more averse to the holiday festivities, with the opinion that he was too ancient to go about like Morris dancers to every house that is open at Christmas. The question of town versus country becomes even more complicated with Walpole's primary choice of residence as his villa Strawberry Hill. Neither in town nor quite in the country either, it was the ideal location to have company over or to make a quick trip to London for bustling entertainment. Or we have seen that Strawberry Hill also served as the ideal location to retreat to his garden for a solitary holiday. The unique position and identity of the villa is echoed in Horace Walpole's famous out-of-town party at Christmas and Easter, which is quite witty that this is Walpole's chosen name for his traditional gathering, as Strawberry Hill was, after all, technically not in town. This out-of-town party was quite the perfect solution to selectively celebrate the holiday in a social manner without being isolated at the country estate or encumbered with people in London, the key word being selective. He mentions his annual event in a letter to George Montagu on the 30th of December 1761, stating, "I have been out of town with Lord Waldegrave, Selwyn, and Williams. It was melancholy missing the poor Edgecombe who was constantly at the Christmas and Easter parties. Did you see the charming picture Reynolds painted for me of him, Selwyn, and Williams? It is by far one of the best things he has executed," which here is that painting by Sir Joshua Reynolds of George Selwyn, George James Williams, and Richard Edgecombe. It is quite hard to believe this painting was to commemorate a Christmas party. There is certainly no depiction of laurel and holly, but rather what seems to be an academic group portrait of 3 scholars poring over their books. Of course, this painting does not show us what their dinner or dessert looked like. There could have been a grand feast or just a small meal of minced pies. But what this painting does show us is that Horace Walpole and his contemporaries enjoyed celebrating the holidays in part with like-minded company in a way that was likely inhibited by the requirements of the regular season. Traditionally, Christmas was a time spent at the country estate with all of your tenants. But as we have seen with Horace Walpole, the genteel society of the late 18th century were changing those traditions. Instead, Christmas was spent where one wanted to spend it. In London, with all of the bustling Christmas activities, including the still popular activity of going to see a pantomime, which Walpole went to see Garrick's Simon at the holidays of 1792, at the country house, where some gentry still preferred to spend the holidays on their estate, or a mixture of the two, socializing with polite entertainment and retreating just a little from all of the Christmas revelries, like Horace Walpole at his villa, Strawberry Hill. Wherever the genteel chose to spend their holiday, food as the focal point remained constant. It was a time for seasonal mince pies and 12 cakes, and a time for a possible treat of a boar's head collar of brawn. Houses and tables were adorned with laurel and holly, and ceramics, including Worcester, were given the opportunity to shine amongst the holiday feasts. From the utilitarian creamware plates for the dinner to the more elaborate soft-paced porcelain creations for dessert, and the delicate gilt tea bowls and saucers for warm holiday beverages, Worcester was an important commodity for the British 18th century Christmas. Thank you.